The war in Gaza may have slowed to a simmer, but Israel's leadership is now entrenched in a battle with itself. The left doesn't trust the government, the right doesn't trust the courts, and in the middle, a traumatized public demanding the truth behind the October 7th failures whilst watching their leaders play musical chairs. This is a power struggle that could shake the foundations of national security, and we're unpacking it in today's show. We'll start from the beginning. After October 7th, there was one question on everyone's mind. How, in heaven's name, did such a crazy event happen when we were supposed to have some of the world's best military and intelligence capabilities? It was only a matter of hours until conspiracy theories started to fly that it was an internal job, which hopefully by now you know is false. October 7th didn't happen intentionally. Rather, decades of ignoring a system with such obvious and glaring flaws made such an event possible. And who was behind ignoring the issues? Well, many felt that the leader of Israel for so many years probably had something to do with it. Should Bibi resign? The left thought absolutely yes. He ran the country when this happened. It was on his watch. He's the one responsible. Meanwhile, many on the right felt this might not be the time. We have a war to win, hostages to bring home, and the country doesn't need more upheaval. More to the point, there might be other factors that aren't just Bibi that were involved in everything that went wrong, like the deep state. By the way, it wasn't like Bibi was offering to stand down. In fact, quite the opposite. He refused to publicly take any responsibility and instead, an inquiry would happen when the war is over. This led many to believe that he prolonged the war to avoid taking responsibility. And so demand started to grow for a public inquiry. You might have heard that term, and today we're going to dissect exactly what that means. It will come as no surprise to you that countries often find themselves making colossal mistakes that harm civilians. But what government wants to admit to their failings? Not many. This is where a public inquiry comes in. It's one of the most important tools a democracy has to protect itself from corruption, incompetence, and abuse of power through accountability. When something goes wrong in a country, the public deserves to know what happened, why it happened, and how it will be prevented next time. A group of people are chosen to look into what went wrong through a public inquiry. The clarion question is, who does this inquiry? You see, in Israel, there are a few ways to go about this, as unfortunately, we have a history of events that needed an investigation, like the Yom Kippur War, which took Israel by complete surprise, or the Second Lebanon War, which was a colossal failure. Both these events, and about 20 others, had what is known here in Israel as a Vadat Chakira Mamlachtit, which translates into a state commission of inquiry. State commissions are the most independent and powerful investigative bodies that exist within a democracy. They're approved by the cabinet or the Knesset, but they operate completely independently right after. A group of people are chosen actually by the Supreme Court, and they're the ones who look into the event. Once formed, the government cannot control it. The members are usually retired judges or senior experts in areas like the military or intelligence or finance, selected because ideally they can't be pressured politically. The commission has very strong powers. Once it goes into investigation, it can call upon anyone to testify, demand any documents from agencies, even like the IDF or the Mossad. They can put witnesses under oath, issue findings that can end careers, and recommend major reforms in the military, intelligence service, or government ministries, even within emergency systems. A typical inquiry collects evidence and then hears testimonies, often public and televised because the public wants to know, will then carefully analyze the failures and produce a public report showing who is responsible and what changes are needed, and then it becomes part of Israel's official record. This can take years to get to the truth and years to get to justice. Now, there are different levels of commissions depending on the severity of the event, but the most powerful and respected one is the State Commission, and that is what the Israeli public really wants. Unfortunately, we have a history of these commissions, like after the Yom Kippur War in 1973. The Israeli government decided to establish the Agranat Commission to investigate the information available prior to the war and how it was assessed, and the decisions that were taken by the military and the civilian authorities, i.e., the government, as well as the readiness and the deployment of the IDF. Over its work, the commission held many sessions, heard dozens of witnesses, and in 1974, an entire year later, issued an interim report that identified serious intelligence and readiness failures, contributing to the surprise and the severity of the war's outbreak. The political fallout, however, is the most important part here. The findings played a central role of the resignation of the then prime minister and the defense minister, marking one of the most consequential consequences of a state commission in our history. We have other examples, like after the Second Lebanon War. In that aftermath of 2006, it was marked by sharp criticism of the IDF's performance and political leadership decisions. Israel established the Winograd Commission to review what went wrong. Though initially set up as a governmental review, and this is important, it was later granted powers equivalent to a full state commission. The commission conducted detailed fact finding and scrutinized both the military and the political decision makers and issued a comprehensive report that assigned both strategic and operational responsibility, afterwards recommending wide reforms in Israel's defense doctrine and civil military coordination. These examples show how when Israel brings in a serious independent inquiry, the results can be public accountability, structural reforms, and in some cases, major political shakeup. These commissions are so important because Israel is a small country with complex security challenges, and without independent investigations, the institutions involved would have to investigate themselves, which usually, as you could probably imagine to yourself, doesn't work. We'll actually see that we're seeing proof of this in real time at the moment. Just FYI, these commissions don't always lead to political change, especially when it comes to one and only Bibi Netanyahu. One of the big complaints lodged against him by his haters that when a commission holds him responsible, he doesn't leave his position. Like at the tragic stampede at the Lag BaOmer pilgrimage in the Upper Galilee, in which 45 people were crushed to death in 2021. The government set up a full state commission to understand how this could happen. The commission was appointed and its members were later chosen by the Supreme Court under the law authorizing state inquiries. It was only in March of 2024 that the commission finally published its final report, and it blamed senior officials, including then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, for personal responsibility for the failure to address long-known safety hazards at the site and recommended structural reforms for crowd management, safety infrastructure, and the policing of mass events. The report also highlighted systematic failures, years of neglect, poor maintenance, ignored warnings, not just a one-time mistake. As critics noted, this inquiry showed again that there is no culture of accountability when it comes to tragedies and Israel's public safety and civil administration systems. 45 people were crushed to death because the system got lazy in actually doing the things that you need to do to create safety. And who's responsible for that? These are the questions that inquiries set out to answer. These three examples show, by the way, the difference of the types of commissions. Their impact can vary, but they are massively important for accountability and, more importantly, for public change. So all this sounds great. There's a public tragedy and the government decides to appoint the Supreme Court to choose a bunch of people to look into this to create public accountability. They'll present the information to the public and then things will change. And it sounds, in theory, good. However, if you've been following along, you'll know that in Israel, unfortunately, being a Supreme Court judge does not mean that you cannot be pressured politically. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Here, the Supreme Court is extremely political, despite not having the public mandate to be so. This puts the state into a conundrum. A state commission of inquiry in Israel is legally binding on the government, meaning its recommendations for reforms, new procedures, or institutional changes must be implemented. Though it cannot directly jail anyone, like its findings on personal responsibility are not criminal, but are often career-ending and forced resignations, banning officials from future positions, and permanently damaging reputations. Whilst the commission cannot indict, it can refer evidence of crimes to the state prosecutor, like the attorney general, effectively triggering legal investigations and ensuring accountability in Israel's political and military system. And so, whilst on a superficial level, we hear that our government and Netanyahu aren't interested in this inquiry, well, we actually have to understand that it's a little bit more complicated. This would be directly handing over the responsibility of what happened on October 7th, the inquiry into it, to the people who have been on a man or a witch hunt of our government political officials. And Whilst we want the pursuit of truth, this complicates things a little bit. Because as we know, our Supreme Court is very, very, very trigger happy. We have seen how it leans so left and looks to continuously block, remove, and undermine our right wing government. The Supreme Court has directly been assisting the Attorney General and the IDF lawyer in incredible cover ups, who, as we know, are in hot water, and I can say that a lot of people have lost trust in them. Whilst in theory the Supreme Court is this high and mighty thing that stays with a lot of integrity, the reality on the ground has been a little bit different. They're so publicly and proudly left leaning, which means that such an inquiry by the people they would choose is something I know that I don't believe can be trusted. Turns out the government feels exactly the same. Look, the facts are simple. There is massive public pressure for a formal independent state commission of inquiry into what went wrong on October 7th. According to a 2024 poll by the Israeli Democracy Institute, 90% of Israelis, 90% across political, ethnic, and religious lines support establishing such a commission. And I can tell you, I think this is the first thing in history that 90% of Israelis agree upon. The question here is not if there should be an inquiry, because yes, we need to know what happened and we need to make changes. The question is, how do we make a good one happen? And this comes to the root of a major issue we're facing here in Israel: the deep, deep, deep distrust between the right and the left. The left wants the Supreme Court choosing who is in the commission because they believe the government is corrupt and responsible. The right feels the opposite. A commission by the Supreme Court means it's flawed from the start and there is no chance of actually getting to the truth. And now, 2 years in, and with an election coming up, people really want answers. So does the Supreme Court, which is being petitioned by multiple people on multiple occasions to force the government into a commission. Remember, there are different levels of inquiries, the highest being the state one, but there could also be a government inquiry or more unofficial look ins and commissions. By the way, there's an important caveat to note, which is that under the 1969 law, which asks for commissions of inquiry of the state, there is a demand that if there's a matter of vital public importance, that a commission happens. But the law only allows the government to do this. It doesn't force them. The government isn't obligated to create a commission. They can create government commissions where members are picked by ministers and they're less independent, but can still get subpoena power if led by a judge, like the Winograd Commission in the Second Lebanon War. This was a second grade level of commission, but still highly effective. And what we call it is a government commission. Why is that important? Well, because the High Court has said that a strong investigative body is needed, but it cannot force the government to set up a state commission specifically. Courts have repeatedly ruled that it's up to the government's discretion, though decisions can be challenged if deemed unreasonable. A few weeks ago, they demanded that the government explain why they haven't launched an inquiry within 30 days. In response, the government has moved towards forming an independent but government appointed commission, i.e., the second level, meaning government ministers will decide who is on the commission. They're doing this to avoid our corrupt Supreme Court deciding. Now, I think we can all understand how this might feel to a public that doesn't trust the government. I mean, these people were in power on October 7th. Won't they go out of their way to appoint people to the commission who will see them favorably? And that's a serious question that the public needs to contend to. But hold that thought, because we now have to talk about something else. The question of who runs the inquiry is an important one, but what they'll be looking into is actually even more important. When we talk about who is responsible for October 7th, the opinions differ. We have the IDF, who are on the ground. We have the intelligence, which should be collecting the intel. And we have the government, which decides what to do with the intelligence. Now, I get that it's easiest to blame the politicians, because that's what we do. Blaming the government for problems makes sense. We vote them in to run our country, and when that fails, they didn't do a good job. Additionally, we don't really get to know much about how the intelligence forces work. That's good and bad. Good, because intelligence needs to be kept private to be effective. Bad, because the secrecy hides all the potential issues within the organization that might be solved with accountability. And then there's the third group that could be blamed, but we don't: the IDF. All of us, except for the pro Palestinian critics, have the utmost respect for them. We worship our soldiers, as we should, but we are also unbelievably dependent on them for our safety. And admitting that they might have issues is incredibly hard for most Israelis, purely on a psychological level. Almost half the country went through the army and has seen the issues with the efficiency, yet it's almost an unspoken topic. It's kind of taboo. The IDF is sacred. All three of these groups operate in tandem, but they also operate separately, and the success of the country depends in many ways on the trust and the cohesion of these entities. As we saw with Ronen Bar, the head of the Shin Bet, who refused to basically step down, the relationship between these parties has been very, very rocky and has become more and more political. A few months back, when the war had calmed down a bit, Netanyahu decided it was time to make a change. He replaced his Minister of Defense, the head of the IDF, the head of the Shin Bet, and just this week, FYI, the head of the Mossad. This new Mossad chief, by the way, is his old military secretary, Roman Goffman, and he'll replace David Barnea in June, making him the first Soviet-born Israeli to reach such a senior position. Goffman brings extensive military experience, including operations in southern Lebanon, Judea and Samaria, Gaza, and the Golan Heights, and was injured on Sderot in October 7th. He has no prior Mossad experience, which is interesting because it makes him the first outsider appointed to lead the agency since 2022. And it's interesting to note that whilst it seems that Bibi has had a smooth relationship with the Mossad publicly, behind the scenes, all is not as it appears. The appointment reflects Netanyahu's trust in Goffman's offensive strategic approach and completes his overhaul of Israel's top security leadership, right? He's now reshaped the IDF, the Shin Bet, and the Mossad, and they're all under his influence. Eagle-eyed viewers will notice that the only leader who hasn't been replaced is Netanyahu. But that could change with elections coming up if a lot of the public gets what they want here in Israel. So now, there is new leadership in these entities, which allows for potentially smoother inquiries. A commission would need to look into each one of these groups, see how they failed individually, and how their relationships impacted their ability to foresee what happened. And it's much easier to do that if the people responsible for the mistakes aren't the ones in charge. Yet still, it's not that simple. When the new chief of staff, Eyal Zamir, to the IDF came in, he launched an internal investigation, and the investigation was meant to figure out what went wrong and who was responsible and how to prevent a repeat of the failures. The IDF's internal probe, again different to a state commission, into the October 7th attacks reviewed intelligence handling, operational decisions, the chain of command, the individual officer performances, collected documents and testimonies to determine what went wrong, and recommended reforms. Like, we know that people saw what was going on in Gaza beforehand. How did that not get to the upper brass? It concluded that, surprise, surprise, there were catastrophic failures, and they identified some of the officer mistakes and proposed changes to procedures and coordination between units. But a deeper dive into the probe by the Torgerman inquiry, which was an inquiry into the inquiry, showed that it was actually incomplete and inadequate. The new guy didn't do a good job in reviewing what happened. Critical gaps remained, and there was very, very limited accountability. Only two mid-level officers were sanctioned or removed. Like, the head of the military intelligence was untouched. How? Whilst broader systematic failures and senior leadership responsibilities were basically left undressed. This has deepened not just public frustration at the way the probes work, but also the need for a much, much larger, all-encompassing inquiry. The chief of staff himself, Zamir, has said it's time for an external inquiry because this wasn't just the failure of the IDF. While they had an internal investigation, the things that went wrong weren't purely their fault. They were due to system failures. It's his opinion that the relationship between the IDF and the government played a massive part. The status quo before the war, intelligence failures, and other systematic issues all contributed. It wasn't purely a military failure. The irony is that despite understanding that these relationships have a massive impact on the country's security, Zamir and Katz, the Minister of Defense, and Zamir's boss, are currently involved in a massive spat. There have been multiple incidences, like Zamir appointing an IDF reservist to a senior position, someone who had previously called for soldiers not to deploy due to political reasons, and Katz publicly called out Zamir's decision, like online, making official statements contradicting him and undermining him. And whilst the reasons for this are not clear to the public, why does Katz dislike him so much? This is exactly the kind of behavior that the probe needs to be looking into. I'll confess, I don't think I want a commission. I can't bear the idea of dredging up all the pain and honestly seeing what should have happened and how this could have been avoided. I want to focus on the future. But as the political drama continues to grace our screens daily, directly impacting the future of this country, despite all the changes that are being made, it's clear to me that we need a much more dramatic change. I sit here and read the news, the petty arguments of our Knesset members, the infighting in the IDF, and I just honestly can't believe it's real. And to me, the public cry for an inquiry is about something much, much deeper. People have had enough of living in a reality here where, for totally pathetic reasons like ego and political gain, our leadership directly endangers lives. We need to understand the systems that failed. But that's the lesser part. We have to actually implement the change because this can't continue. Leadership that thinks it can get away with anything, incompetence in communication that feels like a Mean Girls episode. Enough is enough. This level of behavior, which continues genuinely to continue to shock me every single day, is the real reason that people died on October 7th. Ego and infighting over things that mean nothing cannot continue. It's time for the country to change. I personally don't see how change comes with the same people. But I hope that with long term thinking and a bit of time, the younger generation here in Israel will enter politics and make that change. Elections are coming up, and if I'm honest, I want Bibi to have one more round to get us through Iran 2.0 to lead us to the next stage. But then, when the inquiries are complete, I want new leadership, young blood, new blood, an understanding that what went wrong wasn't just tactical, but actually strategic. We allowed it to go on for too long, and now we must demand that change. Don't you think the time has come? I'm Meira K, and I'll see you next time.